Before we dive into this, I do need to add a bit of a disclaimer. One, I am not saying that your computer is completely useless in the point of this video. Your computer is still very, very much useful, and desktops are still a very, very important part of the computer ecosystem. Two, if you want to emulate the results from this experiment, you are going to have to stay to the end of the video. There are huge asterisks over this entire thing, and I'll explain throughout the entire video why you need to actually beware when buying a setup like this. Hello and welcome to Science Fruit. Science Fruit is a new show on this channel that is going to ask questions and get answers through science. Probably some bad science, but mostly good science. We're going to attempt to eliminate as much BS out of this as possible and just break it down into a pure scientific method. And we're also going to explain why things are instead of just accepting them as fact. The question today is, have laptops reached a point that they are as powerful as a mid-range desktop? And this question came about because of the Nintendo Switch. This little thing is both a console and a handheld, and it does both extremely well. It is matching the Wii U's power at a much, much smaller form factor, which means to me that portable tech has definitely come a long way. And so what we're going to do is we're going to do some research, and we're going to see if it's even possible to get a laptop that works like a desktop. There are two approaches that I found that you can take to get a laptop to desktop performance. One is a desktop replacement class laptop, and the other is an external graphics processing unit. Now, the first one has been around for a while. They usually range anywhere between $1,000 and $3,000, with the $3,000 ones usually having some features that go well above and beyond what you would expect in a laptop. The other method is the external graphics processing unit, and these are relatively new. They came about around the time that my desktop was built, like the first few came out, and they were using a PCI extension slot. So we're going to test both of them. We're going to actually have to find a laptop that is both a desktop replacement class laptop and has eGPU support with the Razer Blade Pro 1060 edition. That one right there is a 17-inch laptop, and it has an i7 processor in it and a GTX 1060 as its graphics card. Either way, we needed to get a core and we needed to start testing. And so now we need to set some test parameters. Before we begin, in order to eliminate all of the bad science out of this, we need to set success condition. And so our success conditions are: this laptop must perform at a similar level to my current desktop. It needs to be able to run all of my applications for video editing. It needs to be running all of my applications for video game design, which include Blender and Unreal Engine. And it needs to be able to run Fruity Loops, since I also use that for video editing occasionally and game design. So it needs to be able to run all of those things without the charger, with the charger, and docked. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually test the frame rates that this produces gaming, and then talk about how it performs with applications. So now let's test some games. Before me, we've got Fallout 4, No Man's Sky, and Arkham Knight. So across the board, the desktop performed about 50 frames per second in Fallout 4. It performed around the 20 frames per second in No Man's Sky, and Arkham, it went anywhere between 60 and 30 frames per second. The laptop, while plugged into the core, performed a full 60 frames per second, dipping down to 59 frames per second in Fallout. It rarely ever dipped, even in main area Boston, which is amazing since that area runs like crap. On No Man's Sky, it hit around 30 frames per second. And then finally, Arkham Knight, and this is the one that I'm the most excited for because I didn't enjoy that game with all of its frame rate issues. Now it runs at 60 frames per second with only dips down into the 58 frames per second, which definitely is an improvement. All in all, the laptop is performing at a desktop level with its eGPU plugged in. Now, how does it perform outside of that? Well, luckily, we don't really have to do too much. We just got to unplug the GPU and go right into it. And what I found was the 1060 Mobile Edition actually performs admirably. It performs at nearly identical with about a frame rate hit of maybe 1 or 2 frames per second while plugged in. That is when it's using all of its power. Now when unplugged, this computer uses something new that I wasn't familiar with, where it equalizes battery use and gaming performance. It ranged around the 30 frames per second mark on almost all games. So all in all, I would say eGPUs are actually not a bad decision. They work well when they're working. And I would say this laptop is definitely performing like a desktop. So it works. We have a situation where we can dock and undock a laptop, and it works similar to the Switch, where it only takes hits on frame rates and generally works properly. When it comes to actual game development applications, I held off on saying this because I tested them first. It honestly does everything I need. At a desktop replacement level, I would say it is capable of doing it. So both eGPUs and desktop replacement did work. But the eGPUs make things so much nicer. I generally work with anywhere between 3 to 4 screens. Right now, I have it on a full 4-screen setup. And how I have achieved this is with the eGPU. I get all of the same video options that I had with a desktop graphics card, but I also get 4 additional USB ports. But so I can mitigate it down to 1 hub, power cord, and the tiny multi-sided USB-C cable. And honestly, it just worked. But is it economically feasible, and why does this work? Why is this as good as that? There's a few reasons. So let's talk about why the laptop, as small as it is as good as the desktop. So for one, we have aging technology. Technology ages rather rapidly. It was using an 8-core processor, the FX chip. That was the pinnacle at the time, but now with the Ryzen processors out, it honestly is completely overshadowed. It's using a Radeon graphics card that is newer, but compared to the 1080, it still falls flat. So the technology in there has aged, and there was a Windows update that I'm sure you guys are all aware of that actually made a lot of old processors obsolete. The other reason is something called diminishing return. You see, 1080p is a hard wall. When we hit 1080p, everyone was like HD, 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 and everyone was trying to achieve the goal of HD. Once we got there, when technology surpassed it, we kind of created an artificial barrier. Now, 4K is a thing, but 4K on any screen under 40 inches is very difficult to tell the difference. And on top of that, it's also extremely difficult to run. Your cost for running 4K significantly outweigh the benefits of 4K on a small screen. Say you have a pre-built desktop. You got it from Dole. And Dole made you this little desktop, and it is functional. It can run its spreadsheets, YouTube, all that stuff. But you want to start playing games. So you put a graphics card, you put a power supply, and you improve the cooling because that thing does not have any cooling in it. Now you've got an upgraded PC, and the power of that thing is significantly higher, and the cost is proportioned. It's not that much, but you may have even doubled the cost of that computer by doing that. And that will run games probably close to 60 frames per second. You take that same concept and you're like, now I'm going to build my next PC. I'm going to make a better PC than this one by upgrading the processor beyond what Dole will sell me. So you build your own PC. It's about double the cost of that PC. And it's about 2 times better. That PC is a significantly better computer. At that point, you can run all games at 60 frames per second. You can run video editing. You can run everything you need to run. And that's pretty much how I built that computer. Beyond that, is the point of diminishing return. After you build a computer with like a 84 core processor and 4 graphics cards, all in SLI, all 1080s, you're gonna get more power, but you're kind of screwing yourself out of money. The cost no longer is an equation of doubling it, it's more like quadrupling it. Because with one 1080, you can run games at 60 frames per second, 1080p. With 2, you could probably run 4K at a decent frame rate. With 4, you might be able to increase the frame rate by like 2 or 3 frames, but you're not going to get that much more performance. Essentially, I built that PC at the point of diminishing return for 1080p. This laptop has been built to hit that mark perfectly. Now, to test if this is actually economically feasible, we have to do a couple different things. For one, we need to compare the cost of this setup to one that would offer the same function. So a desktop at about $1,000 is a pretty beefy desktop. We'll say 15 just because that will give us everything and more. A laptop at about 15 would give us a full desktop replacement laptop. So at that point, we're pretty much running at $3,000 for a really good desktop and a really good laptop. This setup was $2,000 for the laptop on sale, I mind you, about $500 for the eGPU enclosure, and then another $750-ish for the graphics card. At that point, we're actually over the cost of the one computer, like the 2 computer setup. And honestly, this is where it's starting to become difficult to decide whether or not it's actually feasible, because the 2 computers plus a hard drive to transfer between them would cost less, and you'd be getting significantly more. So is the price justifiable? And this is where it gets subjective. Personally, to me, it is. The difference between the laptops is significant. But, and this is a huge but here, it's not going to be for everyone. This type of setup might not work for everyone. All in all, everything worked the way we wanted it to, and honestly, in my opinion, I love having one computer that holds all of the information I need it to, that I can take anywhere I go. My main desktop has become mainly data storage and a secondary recording location. And for the most part, this setup works for me. And here's that asterisk I was telling you about. Before you do something like this, it will be expensive and you need to do a lot of research. This is the Razer Blade Pro 1060. We use the Razer Core and we're using a 1080 GTX in there. Before you buy a laptop with the intention of plugging it into an eGPU, make sure that the manufacturer supports that laptop, and make sure that the eGPU enclosure is using the same functionality as the laptop. Thunderbolt seems to be the new standard, but there were some old ones with the PCI extension slot. You also, and I can't stress this enough, you also need to be extremely careful with what you plug into the back of these GPU enclosures. You can crash it very, very easily. At one point I crashed it because my mouse and my keyboard were in the same area, on the same bus. They don't have that much bandwidth on them, which means external hard drives are a no on there as well. And then finally, I do not think that this technology is ready for the mainstream yet. It will be. I think that this is exactly where we're going. This is where technology is heading for laptops. And it's mainly because it doesn't even have to be a laptop. It could be a tablet. It could be something as small as a tablet being plugged directly into this GPU. As long as the CPU on it is strong enough, I could see us having a literal computer version of the Nintendo Switch within the next like 2-3 years, as long as there's a company that's willing to do it. And essentially, yeah, it worked. It's good science, but it's a good science at a price. Thank you guys for watching. Wolfie